Hi there, everybody. Good morning. It's great to be back with you again. Rabbi Leah here. Tuesday morning, and what a weekend we had. Yes. I'm hoping that you've had an opportunity to relax a little bit, recuperate a little bit, but it appears we have a new president, although there's still some conflicts that have to be resolved, but I think for the most part, many of us breathed a huge sigh of relief. Not necessarily at what the outcome was, but the fact that there is, God willing, an outcome, and we are hopefully able to move on now without too much tumult and chaos. Um, so, it's appropriate that I'm going to talk about this morning because um, in light of what we've been going through this past year, we may feel like we've been tested ultimately in many, many ways. And according to Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the father, which we studied pretty intensively back last spring before Pesach, or actually it was after Pesach, between Pesach and Shavuot, God tested Abraham 10 different times. And the Torah portions that we're reading right now are enumerating some of those tests. There were 10 tests, but the text is silent as to what exactly those tests were. But of course, Jewish scholars aren't silent, and they've speculated throughout the ages what those tests actually were. Maimonides, who was one of the greatest Torah commentators, he was a rabbi and a physician, a philosopher, pretty much an all-around brilliant guy, had his own list. And this was Maimonides' list. And I'm going to proceed, but I just want you to know that somebody is got an electric saw and is hammering out there. I don't quite know what's going on, but they decided to start just as I began talking. So you'll have to forgive that, and I hope that this will come across clear. So here are the 10 tests. Number 1, God tells Abraham to leave his homeland, to become a stranger in a land that God would show him, the land of Canaan. And why is that a significant test? Because Abram, who is not yet Abraham, is an old man. He's 75 years old. Number 2, immediately after he arrives in Canaan, Abraham encounters a famine. So this unembodied voice tells Abraham to go forth to a place that God's going to show him, sight unseen, at a ripe old age, or at an advanced age. I wouldn't say 75 is a ripe old age, but certainly at an advanced age. And they encounter a famine. Number 3, the Egyptian sees his beloved wife, Sarah, whose name is still Sarai at this point, and they bring her to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh takes her as his wife. So we know what that means. Number 4, Abraham faces incredible odds in a battle with 4 or 5 different kings. And then 5, Abraham is given Sarah's handmaid, Hagar, after not being able to have children with Sarah. She's unable to conceive in order to fulfill the promise that God has made that Abraham will be prosperous and will have numerous progeny. He takes Sarah's handmaid, which was customary at that time, and has a child with her. That's 5. Number 6, God tells Abraham to circumcise himself at the age of 99. Oy vey. Number 7, the king of Gerar captures Sarah, intending to take her for himself. Number 8, God tells Abraham to send Hagar away after having this child with her. It's terribly difficult for Abraham. He's not that kind of a guy that wants to send away this woman and her and the child he had with her. But Sarah becomes very envious, and so he does. Number 9, he becomes estranged from his son Ishmael, who was sent away with his mother. And finally, number 10, the doozy of all tests, God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac upon an altar. And of course, the sacrifice of his son, or this near sacrifice, which is known as the Akedah, the story which we read on Rosh Hashanah and which we are going to read this coming week as our Torah portion, clearly the most difficult of all tests. And this is Maimonides' list, and all of these are events which are clearly enumerated in the Torah. Most of the other lists we read have some differences in them. Some of them include not just Torah accounts, but midrashic accounts, stories. For example, there's a Rabbi Ovadia of Bertinoro includes Abraham being thrown into a fiery furnace, and that appears in the Midrash, but it's not in the Torah. And he leaves out the union of Hagar and Abraham. And in another story, Abraham has to hide for what is believed to have been 13 years from King Nimrod, who wanted to kill him, as well as the story of the various kings capturing his nephew Lot, and Abraham being forced to go to war to rescue Lot. So we have a lot of these different midrashim, along with the actual accounts in the Torah of the various tests to which Abraham was put. But no matter what list we read, virtually all of them end with the final test, which is the one of Abraham bringing Isaac up to the mountain and offering him up as a story, as a sacrifice, the Akedah, and we wonder how it is that a father can even consider doing that to their son. So we also wonder why it is that God needed to test Abraham to this degree. I mean, didn't God choose Abraham to begin with because God knew that Abraham was a faithful servant and that he would be obedient and that he would follow God's commandments and instructions? So why these tests that seem to be so extreme, particularly this last one? Well, the answer is we don't know. I mean, we can never really know what God was thinking. We can kind of surmise. We can, we can create our own midrashim, our own stories. It's not the way in which we would consider God to behave in terms of the treatment of our own creations. I mean, after all, we want to feel comforted in our relationship with God, not full of angst in terms of what tests we're going to have to deal with next. And in fact, we read in the book of Isaiah, Nachamu, Nachamu, Nachami, Nachami, comfort me, God, don't challenge me. That's not why I'm here. So in looking at 2020, and we are now in the 11th month of that year, we might say that this has been a year for the books. And the weather is now cooling down. Of course, we don't have that intense change of seasons like we do in the Midwest and in the Northwest and parts of the Plains states, and of course in states on the East Coast. We have a more moderate winter. Even so, we know it's a change of seasons. We know we're coming into the end of the year. And what do we get at the end of the year? We get a lot of lists, right? We get lists of people who have died. We get lists of the critical events that have taken place. We get the time person of the year. We have a review. That was the year that was. And I have a feeling that as soon as the weather starts to warm again in the spring, we're going to have those t-shirts that say, I survived 2020, or I lived through 2020 and all I got was this lousy t-shirt, because that's the way many of us feel. So when something goes wrong nowadays, we kind of shrug our shoulders and we say, well, that's 2020. Because it is just catastrophe and chaos and bad news heaped one upon the other. And if you're feeling like Abraham, facing test after test, so am I. So let's just look at what the past many months have brought. We've had a pandemic, an unstable stock market, and I include in that an unstable economy, racial unrest, an incredibly divided nation resulting from this tumultuous campaign season and a still unresolved election. We've had fires, horrible fires across the West, not to mention drought and other natural disasters, including hurricanes, more hurricanes than ever before, that we went through the alphabet more than one time. Job losses, postponed celebrations, many, many, many postponed celebrations, people dying alone, ongoing and intense isolation. So that's kind of in a nutshell a list of 10, but there have been so many more communal challenges and so many more individual challenges. People having horrible marital problems, illnesses other than COVID, deaths of loved ones, a horrible increase in spousal abuse and child abuse from the tensions of living in quote close quarters. And now, of course, we're seeing record numbers of cases of COVID. Over 100,000 a day for the past week, 127,000 new cases one day last week, 1,000 deaths a day. And, when we count all of that up, maybe we can have a list of 10, the 10 big ones, but it's many, many more than that. And I heard a statistic yesterday that was very troubling, and that was that new cancer diagnoses are down 40% since the pandemic started. Now, one might look at that on the surface and say, new diagnoses of cancer are down 40%. That's wonderful news. But our medical experts and the public health experts are telling us that they believe that cases are not down, only new diagnoses are down. And that's because people are not going to their doctors, they're not seeking medical advice, they're not going to hospitals in the midst of this pandemic. So, we may be looking at, God forbid, many, many, many more cancer cases in the days to come. So I think a lot of us feel like Abraham in the midst of all of these 10 tests. There is an expression that says that God doesn't give us more than we can handle. I don't agree with that. In fact, I disagree fiercely with that, because I don't think that what's happening is coming from God. I don't think that this is some sort of a punishment, or that we are necessarily earning our stripes, or developing a spine of steel and really earning our medal, and so on and so forth. I have a colleague who is a rabbi on the East Coast, and we've talked about this. In fact, the idea for this morning's Hi there came from my dear friend, Rabbi Nafshi, Rabbi Robin Nafshi, and she says the following: tell that to the family whose business failed. They filed for bankruptcy. They were evicted from their home on the morning of their youngest son's bar mitzvah. Then they moved to a fresh start, and within 48 hours, their middle son was hospitalized and needed surgery. Two elderly parents died unexpectedly. Then their landlord cut off heat in the middle of a northern New England winter, and their oldest son died. And she says, believe me, this was far more than they could handle. So it may feel like we're experiencing difficulty and trials and tribulations of Jobian proportions. And like Job, maybe we're expected to suffer these losses and one loss after another without complaining. But I don't think so. We aren't like Abraham, and we're not like Job, who remained quiet in the face of 10 tests in Abraham's case. And maybe what we really want to do is we want to scream and we want to shout out and we want to cry and we want to pound our fist into something soft, or we want to take a pillow and muzzle our cries by screaming into a pillow. Because sometimes we get to a point where we say, enough is enough. And then maybe we sit back and we take stock. Each of us has our own point where we come to terms with I call it a tsunami of tsuris. A tsunami of tsuris. We all know what a tsunami is. A tsunami is this enormous wave of destructive water that flows to such a degree that it is absolutely catastrophic, usually following an earthquake that takes place at or near a large body of water, usually a sea, an ocean, or so on. And we've seen some absolutely catastrophic tsunamis. And I call this a tsunami of tsuris, where we have this wave after wave after wave of things happening. And I think that everybody has their own point at which maybe I don't want to call it a breaking point. I want to call it a point of enlightenment, actually, maybe even an epiphany. I'll give you an example, and it is a political example, but I'm not taking sides on this. Joseph Biden, President-elect Biden, has said that he was not going to run for election in 2020. And what finally switched for him was the incident in Charlottesville, where the Nazis and it was called the Unite the Right rally, where Nazis and other white supremacists were marching against Jews, against blacks, against Muslims. And then, of course, it ended in this catastrophic situation where a young woman, Heather Heyer, was run over by a car and murdered. And following that, a comment by the President of the United States, who said that there were very fine people on both sides. And for Joseph Biden, that was the critical event that caused him to change his mind and say, I can no longer sit back. I must get involved. For other people, it's other things. For some people, it became letter writing campaigns, either way, for a certain politician. For other people, It is, I can tell you, for example, I have friends who lost a child a number of years ago to cancer and became very, very involved in raising money for cancer treatment. So for many people, there is a watershed event, a critical event, a seminal event at which somebody says, for lack of a better expression, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And at that point, there's a switch that's flipped. And I think for many, that happened this year because we can either sit back and say, um, ain't it awful? This is the way it is. This is the way it's going to be. And resign ourselves to catastrophe, sadness, and all the other synonyms that you can use for that. Or we can do something constructive. And it can go either way. And I'm not making a value judgment here. I'm just saying that there are times when there are people who have these incredibly difficult occurrences, and some will break, and others will use that inner strength to move on. Again, no judgments either way, because sometimes we just can't handle what we're given. So I think it's important, if we can, to sit back and take stock. And for me, I'm not going to share specifically what happened, but I will say that there were some critical events that took place this summer, particularly around the racial injustice and George Floyd, and some of the other events that took place that really allowed me to begin to take stock. Seeing Elijah Cummings die, seeing John Lewis die, and then Ruth Bader Ginsburg on Erev Rosh Hashanah. That, to me, was kind of the final straw. But I think that there are silver linings, and that's the point at which we take stock. There are silver linings in those losses, and we have to recognize and continue to recognize the blessings. For me, there are easy things we can do, and there are things that are a little bit more difficult. But I think that when you reach out to someone who is suffering, that more than anything allows us to move out of our own anger, our own disbelief, and our own troubles, and we reach out and become bigger human beings when we reach out to those who are suffering. If we can take a walk outside, if we can listen to someone who is hurting and we can help, if you can soak in a bathtub or have a cup of tea or a glass of wine, now that the dining rooms are open partially again, have a glass of wine if you're allowed to, and it's not contraindicated according to your medications. Listen to soothing music. There are some people out there who are fortunate enough to be living with family and their children, and they can still hug their children. And if you're blessed enough to see them, give them virtual hugs on Zoom, or when they come for a visit, pretend to hug them. Close your eyes, wrap your arms around yourself, and feel as if you are hugging those people, particularly your children and your grandchildren. Meditate. We now have a massage therapist back in our building. Martha, she's wonderful. Make an appointment with her. All the safety guidelines are in place. And think well of others. Just close your eyes and breathe and share positive thoughts. It's amazing how much just thinking positively can change your frame of mind. There's a wonderful movie called What the Bleep Do We Know? I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but it is an incredible movie, and someday maybe we'll watch it. But there is a part of the movie that takes place, and it's a documentary, and but also with some acting. It's hard to describe the genre. But there's a part in the movie where an experiment was done in Japan and this was a number of years ago, in their subway. And they had these very large glass tanks in which there was water, just regular water. And they did an experiment in which they had a group of people who spent time meditating in front of that water, sending out very toxic vibes. I hate the world. Everything's going wrong. I've been sick. I have terrible relationships with people. My job is going bad. And they did this through meditation. And then there were other large vessels of water over which people meditated with positive energy and positive thoughts. Life is good. I am healthy. My relationships are wonderful. My job is going well. People love me, even if it wasn't true. And there was a scientist who then looked through an electron microscope at the way in which the molecules of the water were constructed, and found that the water, the molecules of water over which the negative meditation had been done, was chaotic and really ugly. And the molecules of the water over which the positive meditations had come were actually, the water molecules were beautiful, and I can show you pictures of these. And given that our bodies are made up of a significant amount of water, wouldn't it make more sense to meditate on the good things that are happening? I get to snuggle up with my dogs. I know I'm lucky. Watch a sunrise or a sunset. This time of year, we get the most magnificent sunsets. Talk with a therapist if you need to. But I think more importantly than anything else, be gentle with yourself and be gentle with other people. Treat yourself kindly. Smile. Do it online. Do it with those you love. You know, it's so interesting how we've gotten so used to wearing masks, and yet, even with a mask on, we've been able to adapt and recognize when somebody is smiling. So you don't necessarily have to smile with your mouth. You can smile with your voice, with your eyes, with your attitude, with your thoughts. We are being tested. We're being tested. But I don't think that God is testing us. I believe that God is a loving God. I don't believe God hands us more than we can handle. Sometimes it is just more than we can handle. So be kind, love one another, smile with your heart, with your thoughts, with your face, even without having your mouth in that smile. That's the end of Hi There for today. Have a wonderful day, and know that you are loved, and lehitraot. Bye-bye.